Production of SICA in association with South Carolina ETV. Funding for this special debate is made possible by grants from the John M. Olin Foundation, the Annenberg Foundation, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Laurel Foundation, L. John Polite, Jr., and the Friends of Firing Line.
Street Theater at the University of South Carolina. Welcome to a special firing line debate. I'm Michael Kinsley of the New Republic magazine. Our official topic tonight is Resolve. Freedom of thought is in danger on American campuses. But that's just another way of saying our topic is the controversial phrase politically correct, or PC. As in, how can you read that guy William F. Buckley, Jr.? He's not PC. The affirmative side of tonight's debate takes up the charge that a left-wing orthodoxy is smothering American universities, that robust political debate is being stifled out of an exaggerated concern about offending blacks and women, that nutty theories are replacing traditional teachings, that insignificant minority writers are replacing, quote, dead white males like Aristotle and Shakespeare in the curriculum, that affirmative action is corrupting admission standards. In short, that in the name of toleration and diversity, American universities are becoming intolerant, unscholarly, and undiverse. Of course, if all that were true, this very debate would not be taking place. Ironically, it's up to both sides tonight to prove that robust debate and argumentation are not dead, at least at the University of South Carolina. Let's give them that chance now. Please welcome our debaters. Captain of the affirmative team, as usual, is William F. Buckley, Jr., star of Firing Line and founder of the National Review. Mr. Buckley has a special role here tonight. 40 years ago, he wrote a famous book called God and Man at Yale. In that book, he denounced academic freedom as a superstition and demanded that Yale teach only views that he, William F. Buckley, Jr., approved of. Mr. Buckley's special role tonight is to explain how he came to change his mind. John Silber is president of Boston University. He has held that job for 20 years despite repeated efforts by the faculty to have him removed. Although he is a Democrat who almost became governor of Massachusetts last November, in the academic context he is regarded as a conservative. And yet, if anyone has ever managed to curtail John Silber's exercise of his right of free expression, that event is not recorded. Glenn Loury was professor of political economy at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard until John Silber's Boston University stole him away recently. Trained as a mathematician and economist, he is writing a book on the problem of racial inequality in America. If you'll allow a plug, his writings have also appeared in the pages of the magazine I work for, The New Republic. Dinesh D'Souza is the author of the best-selling book Illiberal Education, The Politics of Race and Sex on Campus, which could almost be taken as the text for tonight's debate. He is a graduate of Dartmouth, where he was founder of the notorious Dartmouth Review, a publication that vigorously exercised free expression, but did not always celebrate the values of tolerance and diversity. Captain of the opposition team is Catharine Stimpson, university professor and dean of the graduate school at Rutgers University in New Jersey. She was the founding editor of Signs, the Journal of Women in Culture and Society. She is the author of a novel and many essays, and is at work on a book about Gertrude Stein. Professor Ronald Walters is chairman of the political science department at Howard University in Washington. He is also a member of the Howard Board of Trustees, a founder of Trans-Africa, the anti-apartheid lobby, and a former president of the African Heritage Studies Association. Professor Stanley Fish of Duke University is a favorite target for critics who say that eccentric professors with exotic theories are wrecking the American college curriculum. His exact title is Arts and Sciences Professor of English and Professor of Law, and I was warned in advance that Professor Fish's title is one text that is not subject to varying personal interpretations. Leon Botstein is president of Bard College in Annandale, New York. Despite his tender years, he has been a college president for even longer than John Silber, since 1970, when he was only 24. Mr. Botstein was recently appointed conductor of the American Symphony Orchestra. I think we can all agree that an orchestra, unlike a university, is not a place where individual freedom of expression should be encouraged. But the only limit on freedom of expression tonight is this gavel, which I will wield ruthlessly, but with complete impartiality. And with that warning, I invite Mr. Buckley to step up to the podium to propose tonight's resolution.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, I hope I won't disappoint my colleagues when I say that freedom of thought ought often to be discouraged. I can think of any number of thoughts I wish hadn't made it to the functioning part of the brain. And as a Christian, I recite every day a prayer that ends with a plea that I not be led into temptation. Little good that prayer did for me tonight. But then I can't practice free speech even here. Why, ask Professor Fish, who loves notoriety, and has revealed to his dumbstruck followers that there is no such thing as free speech except at Hyde Park. And I think he's substantially correct, if only because he repeats an important thesis of a book I wrote 40 years ago about the fate of God and man in a university that has an operative bias, as all colleges and universities do. Quite right, Mr. Fish. But what we have got into in the campuses doesn't much frighten me, actually, though it does appall me. I don't think that in the long run, Smith College's ban on lookism, defined as the antisocial construction of a standard for beauty, will last. The University of Michigan banned speech that stigmatizes or victimizes an individual on the basis of race, ethnicity, religion, sex, social orientation, creed, national origin, ancestry, age, marital status, handicap, or Vietnam-era veteran status. But the same university offers a class on the remasculinization of America. Reaganism and masculinity, the course catalog explains, go together. In this course, we will examine the relationships between popular conceptions of masculinity and neoconservatism in order to assess and critique the importance of gender differences in contemporary culture. Whither we go from studies like that reels the mind. But stuff like that can't go on for very long because bright students won't put up with it. And bright students ultimately drive out bad teaching. But there is something there that appalls. I mean, what do you say about prevailing aesthetic sensibilities when students reaching adult age are willing to go around the campus referring to first-year students as fresh persons? On the other hand, look at Dean Stimpson over here, who is forever attending academic conferences in which he consents to refer to himself as the chair, which I always thought an inanimate object. So there is nothing unanimated about Dean Stimpson, as you will find out, particularly those of us who are M-A-L-E-S. Ogden Nash once wrote that if the German people had had a more highly developed sense of humor, they'd never have let Hitler pull the wool over their eyes. The first time they saw someone goose-stepping and then raising a stiff arm and shouting, "Heil Hitler," they'd have keeled over laughing, as most students will do when they think back on some of the affectations of the current age. William Shakespeare cannot match the poetic reaches of Langston Hughes because he was a white male. There are, of course, serious questions to be pondered. For instance, a recent essay by Irving Kristol could not be published in the 125 colleges, Mr. Botstein tells us, are alert to protect feeling, so alert to it that they do not mind numbing the brain. But in the meantime, I counsel patience and benign disobedience. The Multicultural Management Program fellows recently published a list of words that ought not to be used. One of these is banana. Why? It is an offensive term, referring to Asian Americans who allegedly have abandoned their culture. It is objectionable because no person or group can appropriately attach judgmental terms to others. Why not? Nor can we use bosom because it is offensive reference to a woman's chest. See, woman, it says, it instructs us, nor sweetie. Rejected as an objectionable term of endearment, do not use. But what do I tell my wife who likes it? Especially, do not use ugh, a guttural sound used to mimic American Indian speech, highly offensive. Ugh. And finally, watermelon, after which appears on the multicultural tablet only 3 words, see fried chicken. These folks don't scare me, I know, and they don't much scare you. And I have a feeling that they don't much scare the bright students. The less than bright students we always have to worry about, of course. But they're mostly Democrats, so Congress can take over. Congress can take over that responsibility. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. Professor Stimpson. Professor Stimpson will now oppose the motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, my fellow debaters, our impartial moderator, I am surprised that we are debating this resolution before us at all, for our intellectual life is simply too robust and vigorous to make it plausible. Nevertheless, I am here in a spirit of civility. We are debaters, not terminators, and let me give my opponents their due from my chair. Yes, freedom of thought has its troubles. Freedom of thought has always had its troubles. In 1644, John Milton published one of the great documents in the history of the defense of intellectual freedom, the Areopagitica, and he writes of visiting Galileo in Italy, a Galileo grown old, a prisoner to the Inquisition for thinking in astronomy. Yes, the American campus has seen a few bad things in the past few years, and I deplore them. In summer 1981, the American Association of University Professors had 48 of America's 3,500 colleges and universities on its list of censored administrations. One of these administrators had fired a professor for teaching false doctrine about the ordination of women. But Galileo and Milton are hallowed figures on our campuses. Is a new John Milton forbidden to publish at a university press? Show me the press. Is there a Galileo in a cell? Show me the prison. And indeed, freedom of thought has grown in the last 30 years. We have far more ideas being freely discussed in every discipline. We read both Milton and Virginia Woolf, including her thoughts on Milton. We read both Shakespeare and W.E.B. Du Bois, including his thoughts on Shakespeare. We learn about Galileo and black holes. Things are opening up, not closing down. And one reason why things are opening up is that we have far more people on our campus to enjoy freedom of thought. Now, I fear any threat to freedom of thought, but I have another fear as well. I fear the scare tacticians, the people who are making wild, false charges about censorship. For example, a well-paid, tenured professor at the University of Pennsylvania has compared it to the University of Peking, a hyperbolic insult to the Chinese students who fought and died for freedom in Beijing. If only our resolution had been, the good campus will celebrate academic freedom, civility, ability, and diversity, then I could have spoken for it if Mr. Buckley had invited me.
Mr. Silber and Professor Fish, you would ascend the podium. And President Silber, you have 1.5 minutes to make an opening statement. I'm sure you can summarize your life philosophy in that time.
I don't think anybody here is really afraid that thought and discussion is going to cease on the campuses of America. because thought and discussion is going to continue as long as they're courageous people. When people become so frightened that they are afraid to express their opinion, then it will stop. But this should not obscure the fact that there are people who do their best to intimidate others on campus with regard to the way in which they shall use language and words. The assault on Western culture, for example, is at the very focus of this. No culture has ever been less Western than Western culture because it is not geographical at all. It is a culture that developed from philosophical roots that was concerned to understand the nature of man, the nature of the physical universe, the nature of the good, the nature of the beautiful. Mathematics is not a Western science. Mathematics is a world science. The Chinese, the Africans all use mathematics in the same way that the Arabians, the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Americans do. A science is not Western science. The science that is taught, the physics, the biology, and the chemistry that are taught in Beijing, for example, are the same that are taught at Harvard or at Yale. Marco Polo was a Westerner, true enough, but he expressed the Western emphasis in culture that was summarized by Terence, who said that there is nothing of concern to mankind that is alien to me, and he traveled all the way to China. No one in China ever went to Italy out of that concern.
All right, thank you. Don't leave. Professor Fish.
I think we must remember, in the midst of humor and intelligence and wit, that there are serious issues. When I was an undergraduate at the University of Pennsylvania, a professor I still revere announced one morning that a fellow student, let us call her Miss Smith, would not be in class that day because she was bleeding at both ends. That is, she was at once suffering a bloody nose and was menstruating. The laughter I shared with my classmates at the behest of my teacher was as unthinking as it was cruel. And the fact that among those who laughed were some women only makes the incident worse in retrospect. I say in retrospect because 35 years ago it would not have occurred to anyone, not to my professor or to me or perhaps even to the object of his remark, that there was anything inappropriate about his announcement. Needless to say, that would not be the case today. And the question before us is, does the fact that an instructor who spoke in that way about a female student today would find himself criticized and perhaps disciplined mean that academic freedom or freedom of thought is in danger on American campuses? I think not. Rather, I think that if there is anything in danger, it is the monopoly on thought once held by persons who assumed that the views they espoused and the attitudes they enacted were normative and controversial. Now in 1991, perspectives that once had an exclusive hold on the franchise of discourse have been subject to serious analysis, and perspectives that were once unthinkable are receiving a full and vigorous articulation.
Don't leave. Do you have a question for Professor Fish?
Yes. Do you think you get much mileage out of such a dubious anecdote? At most colleges 35 or 40 years ago, a person would have been seriously reprimanded just for the sheer vulgarity of the remark. I recall at the University of Texas a geologist who talked about taking a girl up to Mount Bunnell and knocking off a chip. That was not acceptable. He was fired for it, and that was only about 35 years ago. This kind of vulgarity, I don't think has ever been acceptable among any academics that had any self-respect or standards.
Is there a question?
That's the question. Two examples. In the same years, in a school in the same city, an all-girls school, a male professor started every class by saying, "Ladies, cross your legs. Now that the gates of hell have been closed, we can begin." And at another university, a northeastern bastion, an instructor used to introduce his classes by saying, "My name is, comma, first name, rhymes with lay. My second name is, rhymes with." Now, I do not believe that these are isolated incidents and that almost every woman that I have spoken to who went to school in these years, A, has stories like that, and B, say sadly that they had to learn to smile.
Well, I think that that is a very selective history. But what bothers me is how one maintains any function for the university when we reduce the pursuit of truth and the claim of the capacity of the human mind to transcend the individual and to know other minds that people come up with the thesis that our knowledge is dependent upon our perspective as either a male or a female, as either a member of one race or another race, as a member of one class or another class, or as a person living in a certain period of history as opposed to another. It seems to me that denial of transcendence that is implied by all of these pronouncements is inimical to the very life of the mind and the very function of the university. And how do you get around that objection?
Okay, I don't think that anyone that I know denies the possibility of transcendence. The denial is that any of the perspectives that are now available has delivered transcendence to us. Okay. So at least in my position, in the positions that I've heard other people on my side of the aisle hold, the wish for, and indeed the yearning for transcendence is a constant. What we must be on watch for, what in theological terms is called idolatry, is the mistaking of some norm, whether it be Western or any other, for the transcendent. That is why inquiry must be kept alive.
Do you believe there is any such thing as a norm, any such thing as an objective judgment that is compelling upon other minds?
I do, and I believe such judgments are developed within institutions like this one and the institutions of our college. When I go in to teach Milton's Paradise Lost, I teach it with a kind of certainty, which of course can be altered by discussion, that holds no hostage to anything like nihilism or skepticism. That doesn't mean that I have necessarily to believe that the truth that I have arrived at is the eternal one, but nevertheless, I am committed to it so long as no one has advanced my understanding to another.
Are there wrong answers?
Many wrong answers.
By what criteria, if, as a matter of fact, the perspective of the individual is as important as you have suggested in some of your writings it is?
I have never suggested that the perspective of the individual is important. Rather, my heresy, if it is one, has been to see individuals as members of what I've called interpretive communities, educated and initiated into traditions of inquiry which they do not originate but step into, so that when I begin to ask questions and answer questions about my subjects, Milton and 17th century poetry, I am stepping into a conversation whose configurations are already in place, and I am constrained necessarily in both my sense of what is right, wrong, and possible by those conversations. I do not think that anyone, least of all myself, can step aside from the traditions of inquiry into which we have been educated. And therefore, there are always objective answers, but they're not always the same ones.
Then you really are suggesting that you are trapped in the conditions under which you've been reared, and I think that is clearly false and clearly evidenced by the individuals who have so remarkably transcended.
The suggestion is false. What in fact I would say is that the kinds of interpretive communities or research traditions in which we all labor have within them mechanisms for their own alteration and investigation and critique. I've been a member of the Milton industry, God willing, for 30 years and perhaps for 30 more. Many things have turned around in that industry. We have changed our minds, and each year we go to the meeting of the Milton Society of America and declare once again the truth.
Okay. Don't leave. Would you like to persecute President Silber for about 5 minutes?
Not at all, especially since I recently read and admired much of his book, especially the chapters on administration and on academic freedom, which puts forward a view somewhat like the view that Mr. Buckley put forward in God and Man at Yale. And so I would ask Professor Silber, given your strong statement in this chapter on academic freedom and also in this chapter on poisoning the well, that freedom as a concept which is unrelated to responsibility is simply a snare and a delusion, would you not say that it's administrators' responsibility if certain forms of speech, which are commonly called hate speech, erupt on your campus, to attempt to deal with them in ways that prevent the disruption of the function of yours or any other university?
I think that's certainly the case, but I think it depends on what you count as hate speech. I am not prepared to say that people can't make jokes at one another's expense. I think the day that I can't say that the wheelbarrow was invented to teach Irishmen to walk on their hind legs will be a time at which I don't want to live in this country, because I won't accept the limitations on free speech. Ethnic jokes that are directed by one person who clearly respects the ethnic group which he is spoofing, it seems to me, are totally acceptable. You do not accept anti-Semitic jokes from Adolf Hitler, but Jewish comedians tell jokes about Jews all the time. And I think we have to have that and not confuse that with hate speech. Now, what I think is ridiculous is for us to to suppose that a university can't expect a higher standard of cordiality and civility than is operative in the rest of society. We don't have to reach the standards of the opera show and the Donahue show at the university in order to show our respect for the First Amendment. It is perfectly reasonable for us to say that those children, those young men and women who attend universities shall be taught by people who are more civilized and more advanced in learning and in experience than they are, to accept standards of conduct that are better than the ones they entered with. And I see nothing wrong in refusing to retain on campus or to advance on campus individuals who aren't willing to accept a certain reasonable level of civility.
Oh, I think that we're growing so close together in our responses that I fear we'll not have a debate. But let me say that you would not, I think, want to compare a campus to a Catskills resort where comedians are telling jokes. Rather, you would, I know, because I've read your book carefully and recently, you would want to think of a campus just in the terms that you spoke of it at the latter end of your remarks. All I ask, wouldn't it be the case that at some point, some forms of speech or verbal action or symbolic action, the categories multiply, might be so disruptive of your own campus that you would feel that you must step in at this point, lest, to use your own words, the well be so poisoned that none of us can drink from it any longer.
Yes, but I think the ways in which we have seen this done by persons who fit into the group of politically correct persons are not the areas in which I would raise this issue. I am a frequent observer of arguments in which female speakers claim that they cannot be understood by males, that only a person who is female could understand the position of women. A person who holds that point of view claims for herself a transcendence that is denied the male. If she knows so much about what males cannot understand, then why does she suppose that the male might not be able to transcend his limits to understand her? The perfect example, I think, is Shakespeare. Shakespeare certainly understood his female characters extremely well. And I think we see examples of our capacity to know other people of other races and of other religions and of other sexes without any great difficulty at all. That difficulty, I think, is manufactured. What it does, it reduces the pursuit of truth into a competing arena of ideologies. And when a university is reduced to simply the promulgation of one ideology or another, or it becomes simply the arena of competing but equally valid ideologies, it's not worth the investment that society has placed in it.
Again, you keep winding around to a position that I would myself claim, and that is if indeed the university should be more than, let's say, a smorgasbord of competing ideologies, and I certainly believe that, then you would have to, along with Mr. Buckley, at least in his recent 1977 version of this book, argue that at a certain point you have to step in and more or less, if not stop, at least critique ideologies that you think are damaging or distressing in large ways. What I'm trying to get you to say is where does your disciplinary function
we got to make that a rhetorical question, I'm afraid. You'll get plenty of chances to answer. And I have to say that both of you have set a very high standard for exchanges tonight. I've been at a lot of these debates, and this is great. Professor Loury, it's your turn.